So Poland's defense minister has unveiled details of the Eastern Shield plan that's aimed to fortify the country's borders with Belarus and Russia.
The government will allocate around 2.5 billion euros. Now, the project would cover 700 kilometers of the Polish border, including 400 kilometers with Belarus. And with us to discuss this issue is Mark Toth, national security and foreign policy expert. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, Anna and Maciej. Good to see you.
So as we just saw this detailed explanation by our colleague Alex Suliński, now do you think this program is going to fend off potential conflict, escalation perhaps of the conflict? Is it a good and effective idea, do you think?
Anna, it's a good start, and it's encouraging. And to your Prime Minister Tusk's credit, he recognizes that Poland faces a war at some point potentially with Russia. And so to actually take the step to go beyond simply a border wall, which was taken by, which was good in and of itself by the last administration, it's good to be doing this. But it serves as a deterrent. It serves as a sign. It's messaging to Moscow that Poland doesn't intend just to lay over, that it's going to fight and make it as difficult as possible for Russia to encroach upon Ukrainian territory. Polish territory, as well as Belarus doing the same. But one key thing that I think it's going to need a counterpunch too. The Russians only respect strength, so this defensive array that's being devised and will be implemented soon over the next 4 years is good. But I can get into this a little bit more later. Poland is also going to need to be able to punch back at Russia.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, apart from these ground defenses that Alex showed us just a while ago, Poland also aims to build a state-of-the-art airspace monitoring system. And, we already have sort of this here in Poland, thanks to NATO effort. So, won't it somehow disturb the already existing NATO systems?
Right. I think the two can run side by side. What you really need for any defensive effort to be effective is a multi-layered approach. And I mean, that starts at the ground level, at the mud level. It includes, the close air, and it even includes space in terms of being able to monitor, understand what Russian troop movements might be. And so from that standpoint, I think it's important. Now, sure, Maciej, you bring up a good point. NATO is very defensive in orientation. It views, Russia as something to be expelled should it decide to go to war against a NATO member state. But in the event of war, you don't want those forces coming onto Polish soil at any point. So by what I was referring to a little bit earlier was by having this counterpunch ability, simply like what we're seeing in Kharkiv right now, you need the ability to interdict those Russian forces before they can get to these defensive fortifications that will be constructed over time. That means ATACMS, that means longer range munitions, things that you already have, but those are stockpiles and capabilities that Poland's going to need to build upon in order to do this. And that's something that they may have to do on their own ahead of NATO before NATO ultimately would decide to get involved or not.
Now, Minister Kosiniak-Kamysz, he said the activities development of the Eastern Shield will involve the local community and businesses. He said that businesses and residents in the surrounding areas would now make their living from the security of the border. How so? Can you explain it to us? How are they going to benefit? I'm not talking about security of the country, but as they're going to build all this, how are they going to, how are they going to be affected by that?
Right. Anna, it's a great question. And in effect, from an economic standpoint, it's incenting the local economies along the Kaliningrad border, as well as along the Belarusian border, to become invested in their own defense. And it will lead to an economic boom. I mean, obviously, when you do this much construction, you infuse, roughly 2.5 billion euros is what I've heard. Now, granted, a billion of that, not quite half, but $1 billion of that is going to purchase 4 aerostat, which are lighter than aircraft that will be surveillance oriented. But still, €1.5 billion will impact the economy. But I also think it's important that that economy take ownership in this defense and not just at an economic level, but at a personal level. As we've seen in Ukraine, Putin's game plan now is to weaponize civilians. We see that in Kharkiv. We've seen it throughout the war in Odessa and in Kiev. He's going to target Polish civilians. So definitely in terms of protecting Polish citizens, Polish territory, there has to be a civilian defense element to this. So I think to get everyone buying into this is important, and economics certainly is one way of accomplishing that.
Well, we'll see how environmentalists are going to react to this. It's also
yeah.
always an issue.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Well, history teaches us that you can easily bypass any defense line if you have a good plan. But if it's long enough, then it gets trickier. Therefore, Mark, I'd like to ask you about the rest of the eastern flank of NATO fortifying itself against a potential Russian attack, because it's not just Poland that's afraid of the threat from the east, right?
Right. Maciej, it's a great question. You know, from my standpoint, and I tend to try to look at things at higher altitude, you have to look at it as a combined approach. You know, the Baltic states, is certainly Poland itself. And then I would even include, you know, for instance, Romania and then Ukraine as well. We can't allow ourselves to get back into a Maginot type line of thinking. We really have to be forward thinking in saying it's a last line of defense. This is a fight that even if Russia were to attack, that you never want to have happen. And so in my mind, it's a great start. It's definitely something that needs to be done, and it sends a clear signal to Russia. But in terms of that, it needs to be cohesive. You know, for instance, if you just look at the graphs that you presented prior to me coming on, you can see that the Suwalki Gap remains open. Now, obviously, that is to allow for the mobility of troops going into the Baltic states if necessary, but that also creates an opening. So that's something that's going to have to be factored in. But the other thing is going to have to be is that we've seen, you know, Russia is very capable, and Belarus would be as well, of launching these long-range strikes where bombers aren't even reaching your territory. And so you're going to need something along the lines of what Israel has put together, which is a symphony of kind of air defenses. You've got their Arrow 2 and 3s, which actually go out into outer space to intercept intercontinental ballistic missiles. You've got Iron Beam, which is a new technology, a satellite-based technology to take down weapons of all kinds. Then you have things more that your viewers are probably more familiar with, Patriots, HIMARS, and the like, to take down Scuds, drones, airplanes. And then even something more simplistic that Israel's deployed to great effect against Hezbollah in northern Lebanon, something called David's Sling, which is more intermediate. So you need that symphony going on. You need the ability to take that forward fight, those long-range attacks, et cetera, to interdict those forces and shoot down those missiles before they ever reach Polish territory. And you need all those partners, as you just pointed out, across the Baltic states and the eastern flank.
Now, Mark, I want to ask you, I guess, a controversial perhaps question, and the question that, we're probably going to speculate on. But as we see all these initiatives, we see all these countries coming together, securing themselves, they're investing in their security. Do you believe that in coming years, I don't want to say 5, 8, because we don't know, but do you believe that this conflict may escalate? Are we preparing for something that might happen?
You know, I wish I had a crystal ball, Anna. It's a great question. You know, I fear that we could be facing that. And, you know, from a military analyst standpoint, what I want us to be, and especially for Poland, our good friends there, to be prepared. It's better to be prepared for something that never happens than not to prepare for some type of surprise attack, such as Pearl Harbor or the like. And so the escalation elements are there. Putin is gearing his economy to go onto a war footing. We've seen that in his recent appointment of Busalov as the new defense minister. He's an economics guy by background. He's going to be mapping that out. And Poland can't step back and say, hey, this isn't happening. And to your country's great credit, before everyone else, really, frankly, besides Ukraine, you've been out in the forefront of saying there's a risk here. And certainly Mr. Tusk has recognized that as well and saying we need to do more. So I think the risk of escalation is very real. I can't tell you with any certainty whether it will happen or not, but I can tell you with certainty that you are wise and prescient and so well, I hope that you're not prescient. I hope that you're prudent, I should say, in terms of making sure this kind of defensive coordination comes about, and if necessary, has an offensive capability as well to push the Russians back and stop them from overrunning Poland and your other partners in the Baltic and states and Eastern Europe.
Right. Romans used to say, if you want peace, prepare for war, right?
That is true. Well, thank you very much for that answer. Mark Toth, national security and foreign policy expert, was our guest. Thank you very much.
Take care. Thank you.